All right. Well, thank you all for coming. I have a little bit of territory to cover, and because everyone went so fast, that means I can last for an hour or two, right? Well, to begin with, I just got back from a conference in Paris, so this is a topical theme. There was a riot of sorts at the premiere of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring in 1913, over 100 years ago. It's amazing to me that that ever could have happened. But in spite of its initial negative reception, that work nevertheless has come to be regarded as a landmark of 20th century creativity. Even into the 20th century, some critics thought that another work, Beethoven's Great Fugue, was repellent. People actually used that word. It was so odd to them. It's not surprising to hear that Oskar Kokoschka, some of you might know him as an artist, Austrian artist, in a letter to Arnold Schoenberg, who's one of the prominent proponents of the 12-tone system, claimed that Schoenberg's cradle was Beethoven's stark and angular Great Fugue. So that's a value judgment on that work. On the other hand, to the pianist Glenn Gould, the Great Fugue by Beethoven was, quote, not only the greatest work Beethoven ever wrote, but just about the most astonishing piece in musical literature. That is pretty impressive. What kind of information is that, though? How does that figure into knowledge organization in general? Shouldn't that be an important part of what we make available to people, whether they are students, the general public, specialized performers, musicologists, or whatever? That kind of assessment is should be reflected somewhere. At any rate, we have two of the most salient features of creative work here, namely aboutness and value. I wanted to spend some time with value and some more detailed aspects of aboutness. I'm going to move here to a video. Let's see if I'll play it. So this is so you can hear that, right? So is this worth a riot? It's exciting, right? Yeah. So they're all very busy, as you can see. Really good video from YouTube. And this is the version of the piece that I grew up with. We had records at home and played them. That's what I got to know. But then later on, I realized, no, this is a ballet. This is a different thing. This is a modern interpretation, actually using the original choreography by Nijinsky, reenacted by a modern ballet group. But this is the same part, cued to the same point in the video that I showed you before. So is this the same work even? You can see the further distinction between work and expression here. It's like a completely different thing. And these people jumping around, that's not what Paris was used to in its ballet halls. They used to have the more traditional, cute, pretty ballet, and then suddenly you get something like this, which is really quite wild. So that's what caused the reactions. Next is the version that I became familiar with next. How many of you recognize this? A few of you? It's a really, really famous animated film by Disney from 1938 or so, Fantasia. Same piece. So, is this the same piece? No, I mean, it's clearly something different, but this is probably what most Americans, or what a lot of people in the world know best when they think of Rite of Spring. This is what people know. And by the way, when I was looking for this clip, I found one where they had this clip plus added sounds from Jurassic Park. So, yeah, again, it's taken one step further away. When does it stop being Stravinsky at that point? Well, you get the idea there. Then the last example here I wanted to give you has to do with the graphical expression. This is the same point as the first two, cued to the very same point. Now this is a graphical. What's going on here? This is a software package that takes musical clips, audio clips, and transforms them using symbols and colors. So different symbols and colors have to do with different sounds, instrument groups, harmonies, depending on how you set it up. So this is a very information-rich graphic. You wouldn't see it. It's like a specialized kind of music notation. There's a lot packed into this, and it visually brings something to your mind much different from either the ballet or the Disney film. But it certainly is packed with a lot of information. So I'll move on from that. You can look at it more if you go online. But by the way, each of those marks there represents each of the different percussion instruments and other instruments too. So maybe, I don't know, 110, 120 instruments that have to be reproduced on one page. So it squeezes a lot of information into one very small place. So, how can a work of any kind so anger people and yet so astound other people? To what category of information do works belong? What characteristics do works of music, among other arts, have that exclude them from the classic data, information, knowledge, wisdom pyramid? Should works of fiction, graphic art, or abstract music be somehow outside our conception of the data knowledge or data wisdom continua? There are value judgments placed on works of art, and while they may change, they nevertheless underscore the ideas of bad and good, low quality and high, unskilled and skilled, routine and inspired. Where do assessments of bad and good, faulty and perfect, backward and progressive, and other measurements fit into knowledge hierarchies or metadata schemas? Theorists of knowledge organization and information science in general have long wrestled with conceptions of knowledge, and it is appropriate to visit and revisit models that have come into acceptance, particularly if there is a wrinkle that has not been sufficiently explored. This paper proposes an enhanced model that features a role for creative works within a knowledge hierarchy that depends on ethics as one of several guiding delimiters. Some of you are already obviously familiar with music metadata. There are a lot of different metadata examples out there, probably hundreds of them. There are some projects that bring them together, like the International Music Metadata Projects Working Group. A lot of different examples there. California Sheet Music Group, Indiana University Digital Music Library, and so on. Dublin Core, a group that are united by the fact that they all are based on Dublin Core and others. But I wanted to give you an example if you haven't seen music metadata before. This is from the New York Philharmonic Digital Archives, fantastic archives devoted to that one very prominent musical organization. This is just one record for a score. You can see the thumbnail over there. The basic metadata is listed here. Composer, score marked by. That's not a typical metadata element but it's marked by Gustav Mahler, Bruno Walter, and Leonard Bernstein. Imagine that. Now that's a pretty nice pedigree. They have a lot of things like that. And then the notes, it says, Mahler last conducted his own first symphony on December 16 and 17, 1909, when he led the New York Philharmonic in the work's United States premiere. After his death in 1911, the score he used in those performances and so on, was used subsequently by Bruno Walter and Leonard Bernstein. So this is the nature of the material. Some of the material is like this. Here's an example of the first page. You can see the different colored markings. A music scholar would be able to go through and identify which ones, or at least guess which ones would be associated based on handwriting and types of comments. So you can see some examples there. Another example that uses a specialized kind of music metadata, not used for bibliographic retrieval, is the JOSCAN research project at Stanford University. Provides a platform for analysis of complete scores of polyphonic music from about 1420 to 1520. There are multiple score formats, vocal parts, and analytical tools. So to give you an idea of what this can do based on metadata that is input from the notes or the analyses made by the people who input the data. You can get a reproduced score here with the 4 parts, and then you can find the vocal ranges. Each of those 4 parts has a vocal range with vocal range and frequency per vocal range. So you can see that can be generated. Additionally, you can get a representation of the entire piece. This is like a thumbprint of the piece. That's all of the parts together. They can also be broken out, so you have the first 1, 2, and 3 broken out based on the kind of activity that's going on there. This is a different kind of metadata that is produced with the intent of being retrieved by researchers, performers, scholars, probably not by your typical library user, but it is nevertheless a kind of serious information seeking and retrieval that should be accessible to people who need it. And those are a couple of more examples. It uses the Humdrum music analysis software. Some of you might have run across this. It's free. It's been around for about 15 or 20 years. It contains a very large number of metadata features that allow musical texts to be tagged according to musical characteristics, including pitch, duration, dynamics, rhythm, instrumentation, proportions, and so on. So all of this is put in and it can be analyzed in a variety of ways. This is helpful if you look at one type of piece, let's say masses from the Renaissance in a certain country over a period of time. You might be able to see commonalities, figure out, well, what is a typical mass like? What is an unusual mass like? And carry that forward too into a subsequent century, look at popular music and so on. So it's a pretty flexible system. These are some examples. I'll skip quickly through this, but which of the Brandenburg concertos contains the BACH motif? It's kind of like a hidden signature in which he uses note equivalents and embeds them. Which of his works has that? You can figure that out using this kind of analysis. Did George Gershwin tend to use more syncopation in his later works? Well, let's put it through the ringer and find out. So it has a lot of power for analysis. So I think I'll move on. Let's see, I'll go. Well, before I go there, I'll just go back here. There are some researchers who have proposed ways to identify genres automatically. There are different methods used there, some of them including musical analysis on this order, in which the audio clips are compared against each other, compiling into a group. And for comparison's sake, you can see which ones are outliers, which ones are typical, and so on, and use that to identify genres. There was one system that was able to take from, I think, 250 or so musical samples, take from that, identify 4 genres with regular precision. The 4 genres being, well, not that useful to most of us, but classical, jazz, rock, and country. So it could do all of those, but I imagine it could be refined in time. That's a pretty primitive. But when you consider that these systems could eventually be used for millions of sound files, you can see why that would be very useful and attractive, rather than having indexers go through and try to figure out the genre for all of these songs. Now there have been approaches to genre identification. This is one set of descriptors basically that were developed for MP3 files. The first iteration of MP3 files. This was part of the digital signature, basically, or the code using all of these different codes. Some of them are pretty specific. Some of them are a little bit on the broad side. You can see big band, chorus. I don't know what booty bass is. Does anyone know what that one is? But acid jazz. The most disturbing one to me, being a classical pianist, is the genre classical. That's insulting. I mean, that it's so general that it's worthless.
So it's ethnic.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's another good example. But at least it's an attempt. These are 2-digit codes that can be embedded and automatically attached to records. So it's not a bad idea. One approach to the analysis of popular music, Abramson in 2003, presented a trio of analytical methods: structural, sociological, and semiotic, which I believe can be a start to an enhanced music metadata model. Structural or stylistic is a fairly broad category that includes form, structure, sometimes including genre. That could be expanded to include compositional methods like 12-tone compositional methods, certain kinds of harmonic schools of composition, detailed analysis, and so on. It can be used for individual works or for classes of works. It would present an opportunity for a kind of family resemblance that has existed in some literary warrant bodies. Some of the large categories could include things like Baroque table music, talk show, guest signature tunes, funeral music, so on. This category could be considered the most quantitative kind of analysis, in some cases leading to categorizations based on such musical elements as musical shapes, intervals, harmonies, rhythms, and so on. So it's kind of a positivistic philosophy of science applied to musical analysis and, in this case, metadata. Sociological, it's a little more complicated, it's a little less quantitative. That would have to do with how social factors influence music. Consumerism, we heard about that with Netflix, really, really interesting examples there. I mean, does the system drive, do people drive the system or does the system drive the people? It's a give and take. There are pressures on both sides. Pop culture, economics, politics. There are some very, very powerful political songs that have been used and adapted and parodied and so on. They just don't exist in a vacuum. You can't analyze them musically and get the full value out of that. There's an extra layer of meaning that's associated with Peru or labor, the labor movement or something like that. So that's an important part. Certainly religion would be included and so on. Semiotic is a third category recommended by Abramson. One of the questions might be, does the quantitative analysis, as detailed as it can be, really explain what a song or a sonata or an opera is about? And not really at all. I mean, that's part of it, clearly, but it's not all. Is the scream, can you see that all right? Is the scream about an anxious person on a bridge with his hands on his face? Maybe. It could be more. And what about this one? So, is a Rossini opera really about mistaken identity and unrequited love, or is it about class relationships and gender roles? Is there something beyond the mere structural stylistic that can cause a listener to cry when listening to a Mahler symphony, which is abstract music, not associated with a sad story or anything like that? Another example would be this. Does anyone know what myth this is associated with? When this painting was painted, all of us would recognize it immediately. Yeah, Leda and the Swan. And even if you know the name, it doesn't necessarily know that, well, that's Zeus who is raping Leda. Now, Leda doesn't really look like she's being, she's smiling, so no means no, but anyway, it's still, it's still a kind of, there's hundreds of examples of this where the picture that you see is only a literal interpretation of what's going on. There's much more behind the scenes. All right. I wanted to, all right, information theory. How much time do I have?
1.5 minutes.
Oh my gosh. Okay, let's see. I think I'll move on to the model then. I'll have to skip over some examples. You'll just have to come to my TED Talk. I'll play this one because I just have to. Or not. Never mind. That's okay. Okay. I'll play this one. Do you recognize what this one is? Oh, shoot. Okay, you get the idea, right? You know the song. That had over 700 million hits. And a lot of the other examples, Beethoven, Bach, maybe 10,000, 20,000, not anywhere close to a million, certainly not 700 million. So popularity isn't necessarily equated with quality. But there's something going on there. Why is it so incredibly popular, and how do you reflect that in a model? So I will move on. I think here we go. I'm getting to some enhanced metadata elements based on the article by, is that my signal? Well, I guess I'm last, so I get to go a little bit longer. But here, I just have a few to go through. Bibliographic metadata elements are the ones that most of us know from standard metadata schemas. There's also potential room for structural or linguistic aspect, which could be a genre facet. How you would describe that would have to be designed, but that could reflect something like the list that we saw before. I don't know if crowdsourcing isn't necessarily the answer, it might have to be more formalized. And then who would do the assigning? There are songs that cross genres and so on, and people would like to quibble about that. That could keep people busy for a long time. Another one is structural or analytical, but having to do with aspects of melody, harmony, rhythm, and instrumentation that would be useful for music researchers, people who need to know music at a deeper level and be able to analyze those qualities to understand if something is part of the norm or an outlier. In other words, being part of the norm means it's less interesting informationally. When you think of information theory as the difference between being randomly organized and highly organized, something that is randomly organized would not be interesting. Something that is highly organized would be more valuable. So which polka would be especially amazing compared to the other group, and for what reasons? So that's the kind that might be able to pull out. Sociological element might be able to explain relationships between music and culture, if such a relationship is even identifiable. In a lot of cases it wouldn't be, but in a database intended to reflect that kind of thing, it could very well be the reason for that system's existence. Semiotic, this gets into meaning, symbolism, references to other creative work, parodies, satires probably too. Hidden meanings that aren't obvious from the literal translation or the literal interpretation of it. And lastly, aesthetic, how do you judge whether something is especially good or bad? This is a problematic one that librarians have avoided specifically for a very long time, and with good reason. It's a slippery slope in a lot of instances, but on the other hand, I think it's important to be able to understand, maybe to a newcomer in the field of art or in music or in literature, to understand that one particular work is ordinary, representative of a certain genre, and other ones might be extraordinary. All right, thank you.
Hey, questions for Emily or Tom? I know you Netflix users out there. I've already been trying to figure out, like, how do I get to those all things again? If I never see them, I only see the big ones. So I was thinking, like, kind of what you're saying about confirmation bias is that it's made me into, or it confirms lazy searching. Like, I just go with what's in front of me rather than trying to search for something. The searching doesn't seem very easy.
Yeah, I think the desire that we end up with Netflix, when you go to Netflix, you're not, in lots of cases, you're not going to like watch a particular kind of thing. You don't think about that before. You're going to watch something. Like that's sort of the desire that's getting fulfilled there.
And if you have kids, then you recommend to watch, Curious George all the
Well, you have separate profiles,
Right.
right?
Or if you're a lazy searcher, you don't.
So I had a question. Do you remember a couple of years ago when they had a competition to figure out the best algorithm? Is anything that you looked at related to that or that determination, or can you tell?
So, they did that, they started that, I believe, right before, so streaming starts, instant streaming starts in 2007, and they start the Netflix price, I think it's the year before that. And so at that time, they were really focused on like accurately predicting how you would rate things, and they've moved away from that sense. So as I understand it, they've implemented some of the early changes that, for like the winning group, but that they sort of that you think Netflix might be like deliberately obscuring the boundaries of its collection in this way, and that librarians are more amenable to at least directing people to kind of like interlibrary loan or making these sorts of things apparent, because they're worried about other things. They don't just care about engagement and like patron retention. That would be very strange. So I think there are differences, but I'm still working out where those differences are. Yeah, it's interesting.
Oh, I was just gonna, when Lenny was just saying, the PA library is another example of a model that obviously Netflix would never entertain. And it's making, this is not directly relevant, but, it was making me reflect on my own behavior as a Netflix user, and how one of the things that I do is, when there's a film festival that I cannot go to, I will bookmark it and then wait, I actually have a cache of these, so like 6 months later when some of them are out on video, I'll go through and find them on Netflix, put them on my queue. They don't have any provision to make notes or to tag anything. So often later I have all these movies and I have no memory at all of why I thought I wanted to see them or what they are. And it's always like it's an inconvenience, and I think like easily they could have some note provision, but it actually made me realize like that's not just an oversight.
I don't think it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do something similar. I'll look up, like, at the end of the year, it'll be like the best of lists, and I want to go through and I find everything, and I remind myself to go and check again to see what's in there. But yeah, my queue is absurdly long, and they reorder it too. So things come up at the top, and I'm like, I don't even remember why that's there. But yes, I think you're right that it's not really an oversight. They're not terribly into your like I don't know, interaction with or like interrogation of the system.
I think we need to infiltrate. Like, get a job is one of the, it's time, but.
I would love to tag for them. I really want them. They apparently send taggers like a 30-page training packet of some sort that I really want to get my hands on. They don't seem to want to give it to me. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, you're not gonna search for something on Netflix and have them say, we don't have it, but it's on Amazon.
Yeah.
Other questions? Or Emily? Yes.
Tom. So when I did this small study of this small group of music students, they wanted things, and this is part of the interesting stuff that came out of the focus group questions, but they wanted to do things like sing into the catalog and have the catalog deliver all of the manifestations of what they received. Which, the technology exists, and in a way it would be a nice application to a library catalog. I wonder if you see any of the stuff you looked at, any of this stuff as realistic for something for a library to provide.
Well, the ones that I spent most of that attracted me the most are ones that probably wouldn't be that useful in a library catalog. It would be more an application that a smaller group of people would probably use, like researchers in Renaissance music or something like that, or maybe classical, a period, or a more modern genre, or looking at the social movement. So I'd see it more something like that. The broader ones might be something dealing with genre identification and enhancing that. I mean, the current genres that are out there are either too vague or too quirky, like the ones we saw. I mean, how can you figure out what is really going to be useful? I'm sure that like that booty bang or whatever. I mean, how many are really listed there? So I have no idea. But that would probably be the most applicable, and I think that's where most of the work is going on commercially too, because companies that deal with a lot of audio files want them to be retrieved. So there's some financial incentive for them to get out there and get something effective going. So that one I think might be more useful.
More comments, questions?
I'll follow up on that.
Yeah.
Involves both of you. Is Margaret still here? Yeah, and so the idea of allowing social tagging, and I think in terms of library catalogs, but allowing social tagging to enhance the information we provide, so that there's more information for specific uses and there's more rating type information, but allowing
there was one study that I ran across working toward this, and it's related to aesthetics. And the idea was to develop a system that would allow people, basically crowdsource whether something is good or bad, attractive or not. And it works. Maybe some of you have seen websites that allow you to compare kittens. Cuter? Is this one cuter or is this one cuter? And then you keep doing that. And if a million people do that, then you end up with the absolute cutest kitten in the world. But there are also dogs, and you won't be surprised to know this, but there are ones for people too. Cute, not cute, and so on. So there are ways, and using that side-by-side comparison, it allowed the researchers to move from a central 50 for absolutely neutral, okay, to more enhanced. So the more comments they had and the more items they had in the database, the more sophisticated the system was. So if you have a huge amount of people contributing, then maybe that could help doing that. And that would also avoid misclassification. I might think that dog is especially cute, but maybe because it's sad, and slightly, asymmetrical face, which I would, something like that. But that would be the outlier, and statistically, my vote wouldn't count.
I can see some issues though. In information retrieval with music, there's a great interest now in automatic genre classification and in feature extraction to describe music computationally without human input, without that sociocultural component, to sort things out. Oftentimes the developers who are doing these algorithm development have minimal musicological training, but as long as they can, as long as they can work on the computational side, the knowledge of music as a really broad and deep phenomenon across the whole world in its many, many, manifestations. That's not as important as developing some of these tools to do things that they think people want to do. If that's even the thought, the user isn't always included in some of these aims. But so genre and mood-based access is really trendy. And when we talk about aesthetics, good versus bad, of course there are a lot of problems with that, but it will be so difficult to crowdsource, like you're saying, Chinese opera. How are people going to respond to that unless you understand it? And you almost have to have that packaging that goes with it to really, I guess if you're not used to hearing it, would sound very shrill and very, very
ugly. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
but in fact, should that knee-jerk aesthetic reaction be used to tag it, or is it? It's very difficult to reduce music into any number of elements and make sure that those elements are informational and not loaded with all sorts of conflicting and problematic values going into. It's just, it's a huge problem.
It's very complex, and maybe that's why there's so many people with music backgrounds in this field, because it's so it's very, very interesting. But you have to. I think it makes sense, like you were saying, to separate those things out. So you have the highly technical. One of the systems that I looked at was completely scientific. You didn't have to have any knowledge of music to process these audio files, and that was useful for those 4 categories, for those 4 genres. They didn't really know anything about those. Just statistically, they broke into those 4 groups. But that could be one angle of it. It certainly doesn't represent everything there. And the whole question of mood, that's a tricky one too.
I mean, computationally, can anything that we do computationally really tell us more about music than people who practice that music? That is the big question.
Yeah.
Any last comments or questions for our two presenters? Okay, when I looked at the agenda, I saw this is the part where I have to Richard, do you have any closing remarks for